Two astronauts who were supposed to be on the International Space Station for 8 days may be stuck there until next year. Elon Musk may soon drop news that could turn an already dire situation into a nightmare for Boeing Starliner. Currently, two astronauts are stuck aboard the International Space Station, missing out on much-needed rest and time with loved ones. NASA's lack of confidence in the Starliner's safety keeps them from coming home. NASA has decided that Butch Wilmore and Sunita Williams will return with a SpaceX crew next February. But what if Musk's revelation holds an even darker truth? As we explore the unfolding drama, one thing becomes clear. The Boeing Starliner's astronauts are not with us anymore. The rise of SpaceX and the fall of Boeing Starliner is a significant chapter in modern space exploration. In August 2024, Elon Musk sent out a tweet that seemed like a subtle jab. He hinted that aircraft companies won't rule the space industry, just like car makers don't run the aircraft business. Musk was clearly aiming at Boeing, the big aircraft company that also builds space systems. Musk's words didn't just come out of nowhere. They followed a string of events involving NASA. NASA revealed that astronauts Sunita Williams and Butch Wilmore, who embarked on a journey aboard Boeing Starliner, would be returning to Earth using a SpaceX vehicle instead. Initially, they launched into space on June 5, 2024, with plans to come back after approximately 8 days. However, unforeseen technical glitches occurred during the spacecraft's docking attempt. In light of these issues, NASA deemed it unsafe to bring them back using Boeing's vehicle. Musk pointed out that if SpaceX wasn't around, NASA might have had to ask Russia to help bring the astronauts home. That would have been a major setback. But how did things end up like this? To understand, we need to rewind and look at what led up to these events. 10 years before the Starliner mess became news, NASA handed out contracts to Boeing and SpaceX. The goal was to enlist their help in transporting astronauts to the International Space Station. This move aimed to lessen America's reliance on Russia for launching astronauts into space. Boeing's plan involved using their spacecraft called the Starliner, which is also known as the CST-100, while SpaceX would use its Crew Dragon spacecraft. Boeing landed a $4.2 billion contract, while SpaceX, seen as an underdog, received $2.6 billion. Even though they got less money, SpaceX has been nailing it since 2020. They have successfully launched 7 crewed missions to the International Space Station using their spacecraft. Boeing, on the other hand, has had 0 successful crewed flights and has gone $1.5 billion over budget. Now, before we get ahead of ourselves, let's talk a bit about the International Space Station. It is this huge lab floating in low Earth orbit, built and maintained by 5 major space agencies: NASA, Roscosmos, ESA, JAXA, and the CSA. It's the largest thing humans have ever built in space. It serves as a giant science lab where astronauts perform experiments in microgravity and study the space environment. Now, back to Boeing. They thought the Starliner would be the perfect ride for astronauts heading to and from the space station. The spacecraft itself is made up of a reusable crew capsule and a disposable service module. It's bigger than SpaceX's Crew Dragon, but smaller than NASA's Orion capsule, and it can carry up to 7 people, although NASA plans to fly only 4 at a time. Also, it can stay docked to the ISS for up to 7 months. The Starliner launches on an Atlas V-N-22 rocket from Cape Canaveral in Florida. But the Starliner journey hasn't been smooth. Far from it. From software bugs to parachute issues, it's been one setback after another. It was originally supposed to be ready to fly astronauts in 2017, but those plans have been delayed over and over again. Mismanagement, engineering problems, you name it. It's been a rough ride for Boeing. One of the earliest signs of trouble came during a test flight in 2019. A rough start. Boeing launched its Starliner spaceship into space for the first time in December 2019. Now, the plan was for the vessel to dock with the International Space Station. However, it was solely a trial flight with no astronauts present, just some cargo and a crash test dummy named Rosie. The Starliner took off successfully on an Atlas V rocket built by United Launch Alliance. Everything seemed fine at first. About 15 minutes after taking off, the spaceship separated from the rocket. It floated in space, waiting to fire its engines to head toward the International Space Station. But when it was time to do this, nothing happened. Boeing quickly worked to regain control of Starliner. The team managed to fire its main engine and got the spaceship into what they called a stable orbit. The Starliner was safe for the moment. Everyone was holding their breath, trying to figure out what went wrong. Following this incident, NASA and Boeing officials gathered for a press conference at the launch site in Cape Canaveral, Florida. There was a mix of relief and disappointment in the air as they explained what they knew so far. NASA's former administrator, Jim Bridenstine, stepped up to share some of the initial findings. He said that a critical timing error caused the problem. Basically, the spaceship's internal clock was off, making the Starliner think it was farther along in its mission than it really was. This glitch led to a series of wrong maneuvers. The spaceship began doing things it wasn't supposed to do, wasting fuel and putting the mission at risk. This timing error wasn't something anyone had expected. The officials tried to sound optimistic, but it was clear that they were disappointed. As you can imagine, this problem wasn't just a minor setback. The teams had spent years planning every detail of the mission, and seeing things go wrong like this was tough. They had to rethink their next steps and figure out how to fix this major issue before trying another launch. It's strange to think that something as small as a timing mistake could derail a billion-dollar spacecraft. But that's space travel. Even the tiniest details matter. This mission was supposed to be a major step forward, a showcase of Boeing's ability. Instead, it became a lesson on just how easily things can go sideways when dealing with complex technology. But this wasn't the end of the Starliner trouble. Boeing's rocky path to a crewed Starliner launch continued. Due to the initial flight not going smoothly, Boeing had to tweak their plans. They revealed that the Starliner would have to conduct another unmanned test before being deemed fit to transport astronauts. This was a big deal. NASA stepped in and ordered an investigation, which lasted 7 months. By the end of it, they found 80 things that Boeing needed to fix before Starliner could try again. While Boeing was tied up with repairs and investigations, SpaceX was making progress, completing crewed tests that Boeing hadn't even started. But Boeing's troubles weren't over yet. As they prepared for another uncrewed test, they aimed for a 2021 launch. Then engineers discovered something alarming. More than a dozen corroded valves in the propulsion system. It was a mess. Boeing had to go back to the drawing board, running extensive rework and testing to sort out the problem. The launch was delayed again and was eventually pushed to May 2022. When Starliner finally launched for its second spaceflight, it seemed like maybe, just maybe, Boeing had finally gotten it right. This time, the ship didn't encounter any major issues and managed to make it to the space station and back safely. It felt like a long-awaited victory after so many setbacks. Things were finally starting to move forward. By the next month, NASA announced plans for Starliner's first crewed flight. It would be a 2-person test with veteran astronauts Butch Wilmore and Sunita Williams. This was a huge step for Boeing. But who exactly were these astronauts chosen for this high-stakes mission? Butch Wilmore was used to dealing with pressure. He had flown combat missions during the Gulf War in 1991 and had worked as a flight test instructor before becoming an astronaut in 2000. He first went to the International Space Station in 2009 aboard the Shuttle Atlantis, where he delivered important spare parts. Then, in 2014, Wilmore spent 6 months on the station after being launched by a Russian Soyuz. On that mission, he did 4 spacewalks, proving his familiarity with the spacecraft. Sunita Williams made her mark as the first woman to take on the role of a test pilot for a new spacecraft. Before NASA, Williams had served in a Navy helicopter squadron overseas during the Gulf War buildup. NASA picked her in 1998, and she jumped right into working with the International Space Station. Williams first visited the space station in 2006 aboard the Shuttle Discovery, where she stayed for 6.5 months. Her mission was extended after hail damaged her return flight, forcing her to adapt to longer time in space. She later returned to the space station as a commander. With these 2 experienced astronauts, Boeing had a strong team ready to tackle the Starliner. Wilmore and Williams had seen it all: combat missions, long stints in space, and challenging circumstances. They were prepared to take on the Starliner. But the spacecraft itself had its own set of challenges. The hardware issues that had plagued the Starliner didn't just disappear. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing to our channel, Digital Discoveries. Your support means the world to us. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you soon in the next video.